Less than 3 weeks ago, the people living in the sleepy villages of North Wiltshire, located in the heart of the Cotswolds, being a place of stunning natural beauty in rural England, became suddenly galvanised. Letters had dropped into the mailboxes of local residents, advising them that one of this country's biggest developments was being proposed to take root alongside their very back gardens. It wasn't the latest in a string of new housing developments, but a ginormous energy generator. The proposal is being described as a solar park. In reality, it will, apparently, look more like a prison camp with high wire fencing, CCTV cameras and floodlights. The scale is enormous. It will obliterate almost 3 square miles of productive farmland and natural open fields to cover 2,000 acres of beautiful and biodiverse countryside. That's equal to 1,250 football pitches in area. The development, if it goes ahead, would be one of the largest in the country, where Wiltshire already has 8 out of the 10 largest in England. The people now voicing their opposition to the proposal make it clear they are not forming an anti-solar campaign. They do say of the solar park, the scale and location are both wrong. On this wet and cold evening, local residents affected by this proposal, and a good number who aren't but oppose the scheme for various reasons, were called to a meeting by their serving MP, James Gray. This evening's meeting was the latest in just a matter of days since the alarming news broke, in a string of community engagements set now to take place. It was attended by over 400 motivated people, some of whom listened to one of the campaign leaders addressing the throng outside the town hall in the rain. Many more engagements are set to follow, building in the process a dedicated team of campaign experts and supporters. But tonight, the community across North Wiltshire and South Gloucestershire came together.
Can you even have? Well, can I first of all welcome you all, both in this room and in the other room at the end of the corridor. There must be, I suppose, at least 300 or 400 people here that we know of, and I think they're flooding in the door as we speak. And that in itself, I think, sends an extremely powerful and important message to the developers, to Wiltshire Council, to the government, to the planning inspectorate. The mere fact that so many people in a nasty, wet, rainy evening have turned out for a meeting of this kind is of itself hugely important, and thank you very, very much for taking the trouble to do so. Perhaps I could start by setting the scene. This meeting I've called as the local MP. It's only the second time I think that I can remember in my time as your MP that I've done so. The last time was when they were going to close RF Lynham, which we successfully saved in the end. So I think the fact that we've called this meeting and that this number of people have turned up is of itself highly significant. It's an informal meeting, so no decision will be taken, no votes will be taken, there'll be no outcome from it, apart from the fact that the things that you say will be things that I will note and listen to carefully, and may well find myself using in the debates that are to come over the next few years on this very, very important subject. So it's an informal meeting called by me as the MP and assisted by our excellent friends from the Stop, I'm not going to use the expression, Stop the Solar Installation campaign, I think we're going to call it. Limedine sounds much too nice. It sounds like a nice place you want to go to. So we're going to stop the ghastly solar installation meeting, and they've done a fantastic job, and they will be doing a fantastic job in the weeks to come. So that's the background. My meeting called so I can meet my constituents and hear what you've all got to say, and we hope to find a way of allowing you to all have your say, or as many as possible to have your say. How we're quite going to manage that with the two-room arrangement. We'll have to see. We'll find some way of doing it. Now, item 2 is, this may sound odd for this meeting, and I hope you don't start throwing eggs at me. I personally happen to be extremely concerned about climate change. I believe that it is happening. I've done a lot of travel in both the Arctic and the Antarctic, and I've seen it myself. Climate change really does exist, and those who are deniers are wrong. They're simply incorrect. Climate change is without question happening. That's item 1. Item 2 is that I personally happen to support net zero by 2050. I think that's the right way to do it. We have to go down that track. And those, again, who would say, oh, it's all just human, it's not human, it's just natural. Again, I think they're just incorrect. And item 3, I'd say, is that I do think that the use of renewable energy is a very good way of trying to achieve net zero. So let's start off by saying to those who try and criticise us as being NIMBY climate change deniers, we're not. We actually think that something needs to be done. Our children, our grandchildren have to inherit this globe. We have to find a way of making sure the globe that we want them to inherit. So item 1 is don't accuse us in some way of being NIMBYs or being climate change deniers. We're not. We're environmentalists. And it's because we're environmentalists that we're here. Now, 2 or 3 things I just want to touch on, if I may, briefly, and a few questions that people might have in their minds. First of all, what is it? And I think that most of you will know that pretty plainly by now. Those of you who don't, I mean, it's just gigantic. Theoretically 2,000 acres. It's not, of course. It's about 5,000 acres because all of the land is patches on the map, and all the land in between the patches will equally be affected. And therefore, it's not a 2,000 acre thing at all. It's a 5,000 acre, at least maybe 10,000 acre project. One of the biggest, I think, probably the biggest, actually, in England. Probably one of the biggest in the world. So it's an absolutely enormous. It will involve 3 million solar panels being fitted. 3 million. Can you imagine the disruption in bringing 3 million solar panels into this part of the world? And it will involve a 25 or 30 mile connection down to the power station down at Melksham. So the disruption and the industrialisation and the urbanisation is just going to be gigantic, and second to none. It is going to convert one of the finest pieces of rural England into something that's pretty much like an industrial site, and that's why we're all here. They argue that they're doing it because of net zero, because of climate change. Now, if you were to accept that argument, then that would be a perfectly good argument for having a solar farm over the whole of England. That argument could apply absolutely anywhere. And we're not denying it necessarily we want a bit of solar. All we're saying is this is not the right place to do it. They also argue that somehow or other they're being altruistic. They're not into the money. No, of course not. They are Macquarie. They are one of the biggest financial shysters I've ever come across in my life. And they are responsible for the imminent collapse of Thames Water, amongst other things. So they are classic Wall Street hooligans of the worst kind. They're only interested in the money. And you're talking about an enormous amount of money. Just think, if you add together all of the 2,000 acres and multiply by the £1,000 a year which they say they're going to pay out, that comes alone to £80 billion. Now, if you've got £80 billion to pay farmers, just think how much they're going to make out of this thing. They are making shed loads of money out of it, and they're doing it purely for the money. And therefore, to those, when we have these consultation meetings that we've been having recently, to those who would say, oh, this is all to do with climate change, all to do with... It's not. It's about Macquarie and Co. and their shareholders making an enormous amount of money. I don't blame them for that. I'm a capitalist, but nonetheless, that means that we can try and prevent them doing so. So that's why they're trying to do it. Secondly, or thirdly rather, why don't we want it to happen? Now, I think most people in this room will want to tell me why they don't want it to happen, but it's fairly straightforward. First of all, there's the whole landscape question, and the Foss Way, and the historic landscape, and the magnificence of North Wiltshire. Quite interesting to see an objection that the Badminton estate put up recently to a gypsy encampment at Littleton Grove, if I remember rightly, where they said that this is a magnificent piece of historic England, that we mustn't allow, I think it was about 2 or 3 acre little gypsy encampment there, because it would ruin the historic, wonderful nature of the yet here we have the Badminton estate themselves doing precisely what it is that they spoke against. And others, I think, who are equally going to benefit from this, who goes ahead, spoke passionately and wrote in passionately against the so-called solar farm down at Littleton Drew, that was. So, you know, some people here speak with forked tongues in this matter. That's why we don't want it. We don't want it for the question of the landscape. Second, at a time like this, with the world in chaos, with the Ukraine going the way it's going, returning over productive agricultural land over to solar production seems to be just quite wrong, just quite immoral. We here in this country have land and expertise of farming and the weather to produce a lot of food. And to be doing away with thousands of acres of food-producing countryside in favour of some sort of solar thing, which may well disappear within a few years, strikes me as being simply immoral, simply wrong. We shouldn't be doing it, and we must find a way to stop it happening. Fourth, I think that the whole question of the whether or not we oppose solar as a whole or not brings me on to my fourth point, I think, which is this. We here in Wiltshire have already made our huge contribution to solar farming and to renewables. The county's target, the figures I have in front of me, 577 megawatts is their target to achieve. We've already achieved more than that. The solar production in production or in planning is already at 620 megawatts without this one that we're talking about here. So Wiltshire is already making its contribution. We have 54 solar farms, mainly in the north half of the county. Some of them are absolutely huge, 250 acres in Lynham, similar in the RF Rawson, and elsewhere. With a huge contribution we've made already, and we're by far, 8 out of the 10 biggest solar farms are right here in Wiltshire. And elsewhere in England, there are none. So I think all we're saying is that we here are different. We have done what we want to do with regard to climate change. We are making our contribution to renewables. We accept the argument in favour of it, but this particular proposal is simply one proposal too far. We simply don't want it to happen. Well, item 3 I thought I might just touch on, but just grab a quick slurp of water. Item 3 I want to touch on is whether or not it can be stopped. And that, I think, is where this meeting and all the other activities of the Stop Lime Down campaign come into it. It's a matter, because of its size, it will be decided not by the Water Council, but by the Planning Inspectorate in Bristol. They all come to a huge operation. One recently did 400 pages of considerations. It'll take them a number of years, I suspect, to do that. It will, without any question at all, include a public inquiry, make sure it does. It's a very long, drawn-out matter. The Planning Inspectorate will then advise the Secretary of State either to allow it to go ahead or indeed not to. Now, those who think that somehow or other one should be able to speak to the Secretary of State and say, look, please don't do this, I've got lots of constituents who are very opposed to it, I'm afraid that's not correct. That's not how the process works. The Secretary of State is working as a judge in a quasi-judicial position, deciding whether or not to allow this thing to go ahead. And any interference, political interference, simply goes wrong. So the important thing, therefore, is to persuade the Planning Inspectorate, who are the people who will decide, that there's a huge public outcry against it, and the number of people talking about it is a very important part of their consideration. And we must then advance the arguments in careful language, work through carefully the agricultural, the historic, the landscape arguments must then be advanced to them. We must get together a team who will employ the best barristers in the land. There will be a huge operation to be done in order to persuade the inspector to put forward a recommendation to the Secretary of State that it doesn't happen. So that's why numbers matter. I believe it can be stopped. I think that there is a bow wave of indignation in Parliament and in government against these solar farms, so-called, and I think we can find a way of stopping it, so let's not be downhearted. There are those who say, oh, you're wasting your time. No, we're not. We can get this thing stopped, but we do need an enormous amount of effort amongst us all to stop it. One further point on this, I was hearing this evening that at the moment, absolutely central to this question will be this question of 3A and 3B agricultural land. 3A, you can't put a solar farm on it. 3B, you can, under the national policy framework produced in the autumn. Now that strikes me as being absurd. A lot of farmers in this room will no doubt agree with me that a particular field, you can't tell whether it's 3A or 3B. It might well be 3A in one corner, 3B in the other. And there is no scientific way of telling it. I mean, I'm told, with good authority, that English nature haven't got a map to demonstrate which is 3A and which is 3B. So the central question is, can we change the designation for non-solar to 3A and 3B, which would seem to me to make a great deal of sense. I heard this evening that actually the government are beginning to move in that direction. They were in favour of it once before. I asked George Eustace when he was Secretary for DEFRA this, and he said, oh, yeah, 3A and 3B. He had to write to me afterwards and say he'd made a mistake, and actually it was just 3A, not 3B. But I think the government are moving towards a presumption against solar on 3A and 3B, and that of course is what we want here. So a very long and technical and complicated matter to be done in the future, but having a large number of people here, a large number of people running the excellent committee and the protest group and so on, that is of huge importance. Now with regard to what we're going to do immediately, and there are things that can be done immediately, first of all, if you've got nothing else to do, a week on Tuesday at 11:30, I'm going to be asking a question in Parliament to the Secretary for Energy on the subject. I've called a Westminster Hall debate on the subject. We're launching a parliamentary petition. Now I must just explain this very, very briefly. I know there is an extremely good petition already, and if that petition, which many people have signed, reaches 10,000 signatures, that will add to my call for Westminster Hall debate. And you'll end up with the Minister coming to Westminster Hall, and it'll be an hour-and-a-half debate, and it'll be a good way of airing our views. It won't change anything, but it's a good way of airing our views. However, we also have this, which there are lots around. I think Oscar Harrison back there, who works for me, has lots of them somewhere, Oscar, I'm not sure where they are. But this thing here is a parliamentary petition. And I want it to be signed up as well, so we'll actually then end up with two petitions. Now the reason for that is a parliamentary petition, you stand up in Parliament, you make a little speech, you then take the petition down and you put it in a bag, believe it or not, behind the Speaker's chair. That makes it an official petition which the government have to respond to, so it's well worth doing. And incidentally, those who are interested in these things, hence the expression, it's in the bag. I brought the petition, it's in the bag. And that's where it all comes from. So I do want the parliamentary petition to be signed up as well. I hope that's not too much hard work for everybody. And by all means, take forms away, get them signed by friends, relations, and others, and then send them in to me. It has to be hand-signed, I think, Oscar. It has to be hand-signed and on paper. It can't be done electronically, so you get it signed up and send it back to me at House of Commons SW1A0AA. So there are a number of things immediately happening. There's a huge amount, of course, happening by the campaign itself. I think having posters up around these posters, they're brilliant. You know, it's fantastic, and the effort that's been put into doing it is great. Having posters around the place is superb. Speaking to everyone who think about it, people matter. It's a question of small battalions. I don't know if you remember that expression about small battalions. People matter here. And the fact that we've at Malmesbury Town Hall packed the gunnels, and a very large number of people incidentally couldn't come. The fact it's packed the gunnels by people who are feeling really, really strongly about this says something to the government and to the inspector and to people like me and to Wiltshire Council. So get on with it, do all these things. We are the small battalions, but I believe the small battalions can prevail against Macquarie and will prevail, and with all of your help, we'll achieve what we want to achieve, namely stopping this thing dead in its tracks. Thank you very much. Now, I quite want to hear from all of you. Oscar is back there with a notepad. We'll be taking a few notes. Only people come up with bright ideas or interesting questions and things, Oscar will take a note of it. It's entirely informal and don't feel you have to. So let's have a few contributions from the floor. I know that our friends from the media would like to hear from some real people as opposed to politicians. Well, I'll leave at one side, disagreeing with your premise, but I can understand why you make it. I can understand the point you're making. The answer to your question is that this is a matter, it won't be called in as such, called in as a technicality. It'll be considered by the inspector. The inspector will be asked to look at it by the department. He will go through an enormous process. I mean, these processes take 5-10 years very often. Huge process, including probably a public inquiry. I'm sure there will be a public inquiry. And he will then produce a report from it. That report will then go to the Secretary of State, and frankly, it doesn't really matter who the Secretary of State is, Labour, Conservative, who the personality is. It's extremely rarely that, if ever, the Secretary of State would disagree with the Inspector. So it's a bit of a technicality. Also, I'm going to annoy you now. Some of my best friends are Labour, and the Labour are actually very sensitive about the countryside, as are we. It's a terrible thing to say that, isn't it? But true. It's actually. So I wouldn't be too worried about that. But as I say, I hope that come November the 14th, you heard it here first. November the 14th. I hope that your prediction of a Labour landslide will be incorrect. Right to be concerned. And we had this, basically, I don't know if you knew about the range proposal down near Chippenham. And we had a huge campaign against the range, and we finally got that stopped, as a result of which they then built 3 or 5 huge, ghastly, horrible warehouses at Junction 17. And so I think you're right to be concerned about that. And if I was Macquarie, what Macquarie will do, and I'm no financier, so don't take the following as gospel, but they will have 20 of these applications going at this moment. And they'll hope that one of the 20 will work. And that's partly why I think people power counts, that Macquarie will be looking at this and saying, well, hang on. We've got the MP, we've got all sorts of other people, and we've got thousands and thousands of local people opposed to it, and we've got a 25-mile linkage into Melksham. That sounds like it's hardly worth the paper it's written on, whereas here's one in Wales, or here's one in Lincolnshire or somewhere, which is much easier to do. So I think we have to keep up the pressure, because I think what you describe is exactly right. They'll come back and say, okay, fine, it's not 2,000 acres, it's 500 acres, and we'll all go, okay then, but that will be just as bad. Or not quite bad. Yes, she's right, and then one of the judgments that they made recently on the, I think it was the Kent one, made precisely that point, that one of the reasons that the inspector found in favour of it was because it was very near the grid. Which this one isn't, and therefore they need to have a huge thing in order to pay for the cost. And there's some connection down to Melksham. We're not talking about a wire. I gather some of these wires are 10 feet wide. It's like a huge, I gather a 6 metre wide tunnel dug from here down to Melksham. Or theoretically probably overhead in the end, but I mean, it's an enormous amount of effort and money cost, and therefore I think you're quite right in saying if they don't get the 2,000 acres, they very probably won't go ahead with it. I don't think we'll go ahead with it anyhow. I'm much involved with the grid through my work on the Environmental Audit Committee. And the grid is simply not up to scratch. So, for example, Southampton Port, ships go into Southampton Port, and theoretically they can plug into the harbour and they get all the electricity they need for while they're there. The grid can't supply the ships in Southampton Harbour, and therefore they've got to use their diesel engines to provide lighting and heating and so on and so forth on the ship. And that makes a huge contribution to CO2 overhead. But we've been trying to battle this one out, and the grid is simply not fit for purpose. And therefore these guys, I mean, they will try and get the permission here, and they realise they've got a real problem with doing it. A friend of mine, actually, I'm not sure he's here, he lives in Cricklade. He is a developer, and he's like, I've never been near Wiltshire. You can't get, the grid is not up to it. He does Wales, he does Cornwall, Scotland, various other things. But he said, Wiltshire, I wouldn't do Wiltshire because it's crazy. You simply can't get a linkage into the grid for love nor money. And I think that's the case here. So they'll go for the permission. Whether or not they'll actually then turn around and actually do it is another matter. We'll have to see about that. Philip, I think...
Well, if you want to swap over, now's the time to do it, I would have thought.
Is that... Okay, before I do...
One more
yes,
question.
Yeah.
We, as in my wife and I, and along with, I expect, quite a number of other people here with land, have had already a precursor to the compulsory purchase agreement on our land. How can we, as the little man here, fight against that and not have our land sequestrated for the purpose of money going to the BVIs?
I entirely agree with you. I don't know if you heard the question, but the question is about the use of compulsory purchase orders. My understanding, I might be wrong here, my understanding is that that's only for the wire, only for the connection to Melksham rather than for the...
It's a 15-metre tunnel under your land.
Absolutely. No, I agree with you.
That is not a wire.
Well, I meant all right, not wire. I meant, but the connection, as you correctly say, I think it's scandalous. I've also actually thought that all compulsory purchase orders were scandalous and shouldn't be used as people's property. And therefore, forcing a farmer to give up a huge great thing across his field against his will strikes me as being completely wrong. I think it's an argument that we should be advancing very strongly during the time that's going to come in the next few years. We're debating this matter. But I think the CPO for the connection is just incorrect. It's wrong.
Can I just ask one question, James, before you go? Is there any way, given Macquarie's bank's track record in this country on infrastructure projects, I think it was the M6 toll road, then as we know we've been there for the 19 billion bill for their depredations in relation to Thames Water. Is there any way that the government can prevent the vampire bank, as I believe it's known, because it sucks every project it invests in dry? Is there any way we can stop them, given their track record, from investing in an infrastructure project in this country? Because if they're out of the equation, there's a good chance that the project won't be able to
the question is whether or not we can stop Macquarie because they have a very bad track record in terms of their infrastructure investment. But I think the simple answer to the question is that planning takes no consideration as to who the applicant is. And therefore, Mickey Mouse can apply to build a skyscraper in your garden, and the planning inspector will simply decide whether or not that skyscraper should be allowable, even if Mickey Mouse doesn't actually exist. And therefore, I think the planning inspector will not consider Macquarie's financial standing when he's considering it. However, the point you make is an extremely good one, that if we're going to be handing over the infrastructure of our country, Thames Water, motorways and the rest of it, to a fairly low-grade bunch of financiers. Actually, I mustn't be rude about financiers. I'm sure there are plenty of them in this room. I wish I'd been one. That's the only thing I would say. I wouldn't. Smart suit on. So we mustn't be rude about them. But they're interested in making money, and I don't blame them for that. That's capitalism for you. But I think the government might have to think about, as you correctly say, George, might have to think about whether or not allowing these people who are Australians and they're known as kangaroo vampires. Should we actually be allowing those people to come here, desecrate the countryside the way that they're proposing, and then do a financial fiddle and skedaddle, which is what they'll do. Incidentally, talking of which, just one final point on that. If you're a farmer, and if you think that you're going to get £1 million an acre for 40 years from Macquarie and Co., and that in 40 years' time Macquarie are going to come back and they're going to return your fields to what they were, well, you're wrong. They ain't going to do that. I'd be very surprised if Macquarie lasts more than a year or two, then they'll sell out to somebody else, then somebody else will sell out to somebody else, it'll all go to Wall Street, and the whole thing will become very much like the mortgage scandal we had in the banking crash. The notion that somewhere or other will be one organisation who will somehow put this back to rights in 40 years' time, I'm afraid to say, is just for the birds. It's not the case. So don't trust them. I'm very keen to, if you don't mind. Okay, right. Go on.
Solar panels, when they're finished with, aren't even allowed to go in the big refuse dumps, in the big industrial dumps. They're not allowed in there.
Well, that's 40 years from now.
Yeah.
Well, I think someone needs to look into the fact that most of these panels are actually made by the Uyghurs in China. They come from China, made by the Uyghurs, very probably slave labour. So it's worth looking into. So I'll take one final one, then I must go. And the question was, I don't know if you could hear it, the question was whether or not any efforts have been made to persuade the individual landowners, all of whom, most of whom will be known to people in this room, not to do it. And the answer, I'm afraid, is this thing's been going on now for 2 or 3 years. It's not something that's just happened. They've been in negotiations with the developer for a very long time. And, you know, to some degree, I don't blame them. If I had 300 acres that need nothing else to do with poor quality land, and I was going to get £300,000 a year for doing absolutely nothing at all, multiply that by 40 and you're getting £12 million a year altogether for doing absolutely nothing at all. In a sort of way, I don't blame them. I mean, you know, if you find a diamond mine, if you find a diamond mine under, if you find a, no, hang on, so, if you find a diamond mine under your house, I wouldn't blame you for knocking your house down to dig diamonds up. So I think we shouldn't really make it personal. If a farmer chooses to do, don't let's make it personal, maybe. If I were them, I'd be thinking again. And the fact that so many people are turning out, so many people are doing what they're doing, will make some of these people who are they're not bad people. It may well make them think again. I just don't know what the legal connection is between them and the developer. I suspect they've probably signed a piece of paper already, but I might be wrong there. Forgive me, I'm going to go and say the same thing down the corridor, and Hugh Roche is going to come here and say something different, I hope, here. And I do apologise again for the arrangements. I hadn't quite anticipated this big, and we just couldn't think of another place that would be bigger. The school hall would be the only one that was bigger, but it's, of course, Easter holidays, so they're not here. So, thank you again for being here. I'm going to go in and speak to the ladies and gentlemen in the other room, and Hugh Roche, I think, is going to come and speak to you here. So,
I'm going to give them an interview. Thank you, James. I'm not Hugh Roche. The main event is going to be here in a little moment. Well, sorry, the sub-event to the main event.
But introduce yourself, if you
I'm Piers Dibben. I live in Trinity Farm, which is in Rodbourne. We're on the edge of Area E. We butt up against the land. We've got a bird's eye view. And yes, I do feel very passionate about it. I think the really thing I wanted to let everybody know about tonight is that the petition, which when we learnt about this, which was just 3 weeks ago, was languishing at 2,500 votes. And that had been from Lincolnshire, Kent, I mean it had literally come from all over. North Wiltshire has taken that to the brink of 10,000 in a blink of an eye. That's all of us. And we we'll be through 10,000 by tomorrow. And once we get to 10,000, of course, there's a next target. And that's 100,000. Although, you know, let's start with the little eggs and then move on. The second thing I'd just like to say is that many of you have asked us, how can we be involved? And in fact, I've had lots of questions about how do I know that the people involved are representing us in a reasonable way and in our own, and I mean, you know, let's face it, in our interests. So what I would say to that is I suggest that you contact through the website stoplymedown.com and contact, we've got an excellent mediator there who's A.K. Fuller, Anna Kate, who lives in the middle of literally their farm, Craig and Anna Kate's farm, is literally surrounded. It's literally inhuman what is potentially going to happen to them. In the dark of night, after a couple of rum and cokes occasionally, we think about class actions against Island Green for the removal of the human rights of all of the people who are going to be affected by this. I think that's probably pie in the sky, but what the hell? It's worth thinking about. And I was also very interested to hear James be quite so, well, you know, let's face it, rude about the vulture Macquarie when he's outside of his parliamentary privilege. Because they are, I mean, to my mind, criminals. And what they've done to Thames Water, what they've done to the other assets that we own, we know they strip them. And look what's happened in the case of Thames Water. They take it, they strip it, then they make the user, the customer pay. And that is going to be exactly what's going to happen to us. We will pay for their avarice. And I just think that's got to be ended. So please go to Stop Lyme Down. If you haven't signed the petition, please sign the petition. And now, with no further ado, our leading advocate is Hugh Roche.
Good evening. I've never done 2 speeches in one night, so this will be a first. I'm sorry, they kept asking very complicated questions next door, which I've hopefully answered. Thank you all for turning up in such amazing numbers. It's an amazing effort to fill up 2 rooms. There's a gentleman here who's been involved in another campaign, and I said, how are we doing for our first meeting? He said, my God, I've never seen anything like it. So this is great, okay? So I should normally address you as, ladies and gentlemen. But in honour of the Foss, I'm going to say, welcome, friends, Romans, and countrymen. So who am I? I'm Hugh Roche. I have lived in the area for over 25 years. So I'm a relative newbie. I live between Norton and Foxley with my wife and 3 children. My late father was a farmer. I love the countryside and villages, and I run a business locally. My mother's family have lived in this area at Foxley for 60 years. So what is Lyme Down Solar Park? Well, there are 2 things it's not. It's not a park and it's not a farm. It is an industrial solar estate. And it's a solar estate covering over 2,000 acres, stretching over 9 miles of Cotswold farmed countryside. It's a gigantic battery storage area. above Hallavington. And it's a development with over 1 million solar panels. Who are the developers? Well, they ain't local. The scheme's developer is a company called Island Green Power, which is an opaque Bermuda-registered business with its head office in London. The developer is 50% owned by, I get this wrong every time, Macquarie? Macquarie, okay. I'm going to get it wrong again, so I apologise. It's owned by Macquarie Asset Management, widely reported to have played a key part in pushing Thames Water to the brink of collapse by loading it up with unsustainable debt. Contrary to some of the pledges laid out in the developer's glossy promotional material, the developers are not motivated by a desire to protect the planet from climate change. Their objective is to generate short-term profit and tax efficiencies, which they aim to achieve by preying on horribly misinformed landowners driven by greed over a sense of societal responsibility or loyalty to their area. In some, it is a conflict between selling their farm and houses or accept this proposal and the reputational damage that goes along with it. A devil's choice. So who are we? Who is Stop Lyme Down? One thing we're not is anti-solar. All of us believe in solar. We believe in the green revolution. But we believe in the way it should be done, in small packets, 50 watts here, 100 watts here. We're not NIMBYs. For those who don't know, NIMBY's not in my backyard. Wiltshire is our backyard. Wiltshire, like all counties, has been given a target for green energy to be achieved by 2030. We have already exceeded that, and that does not include these plans. So who is Stop Lyme Down? We are lovers of the Cotswold country. We're people who respect important historical sites like the Foss. We are strong believers that these sites, solar sites, should be installed on brownfield and industrial units. Now, interesting enough, some of you may have seen the new development at Junction 17. That has got 65% solar on its roofs. It's a really good example of what should be done and how it can be done. We are also concerned that we're about to lose 2,000 acres of productive farmland in the UK. This is when we already import 40% of the food. It's just insane to go down that approach. So our opposition, our enemy, they've had 3 years to prepare for this. They dropped a hand grenade in our local and community life 3 weeks ago. Actually, it's not even 3 weeks. So we are trying to catch up. We have been shocked by their plans as communities, and there's a sense of outrage on this proposal across the whole countryside. As a group, we are improving, we're learning quickly. We have experts now within Stop Lyme Down who understand the proposal on a technical level. We are getting better, okay? And this argument will be one on technicalities. It's early days, and our opposition is well funded. Macquarie? Macquarie. A Vulture Australian infrastructure fund with serious funds, okay? So we cannot underestimate the enemy. Our greatest resource is in this room, in the next door room, and in the local communities and towns and villages around us. I personally have never seen it so strong. I told you I live in Foxley. I've been there 5 years. I've met people in Foxley I haven't met. I mean, there's only about 40 people in Foxley. But it's been great for the community. I've never known everyone so linked. And the passion has to stay. This is going to be a long fight. In 2 weeks, Stop Solar, Stop Lyme Down, our group, will give you all a full structure of who we are, okay? And that will be with our experts. I can't tell you how much we've done in such a short time. But we want you to know us, and we want you to tell us things that we do not know. Within our amazing communities, we have some serious experts. Some of you might not know, but most solar parks generate 50 megawatts of power, the ones that get planning. Sorry, they're actually 49.9, because at 50 watts, they have to go to a higher level of planning. This proposed industrial solar park will generate 500 megawatts of power. Due to the size of this, it's classified as a nationally significant infrastructure project. What is it? And this is decided at a Secretary of State level. But what's extraordinary is within our community, we have the person who designed that strategy. And he has been working tirelessly in the last 9 days, identifying where things have got through and they haven't got through to help our argument. We have experts on soil. We need some archaeologists. Does anyone know any archaeologists? If you could find an archaeologist, that would be great. And it's important because one of our greatest assets around here is the foss. You know, the current proposal involves installing solar panels there, literally next to the foss. It's one of the most important ancient roads in the UK, and how sad to travel down it now in the middle of the countryside to look out on a view of solar panels. It's awful. We have water and flood specialists. One of them's in the room here. He doesn't know how much he's going to help. But he has been helping another big scheme on botany, again with massive issues of flooding. Now here we are in Malmesbury. We all know Malmesbury. We know that it's touch and go on a heavy winter when it floods. I can tell you something, if this scheme goes ahead, we will get flooding, because the runoff from these panels will be vast and quick. We even have some solar park developers in our team, poachers turned gamekeepers. They are very kindly advising us on this, but the ones that we're using, interesting enough, they develop on brownfield sites, which is exactly where we think they should be developed. The grid connection. This, believe it or not, is going to be one of the key things. And I don't know if you're aware of it, but this is why all this solar is heading our way. The grid in Cornwall, Devon, Somerset is full. There is nowhere for the electricity. You could have the biggest solar park in those areas, but there is no way to get it into the grid. We have a grid connection in Melksham. It's 20 miles away. Now they have to take a cable from the solar park down to Melksham. At the moment, on their proposal, it is shown as underground. We've had the steepest learning curve on earth. I mean, I was on the train reading a fascinating 354-page PDF written by the Institute of Engineering on the cost of cabling. And according to this, which I was interested, per 15 kilometres, the cost of overground cable is 25 million, and for underground is 260. I can guess which way this is going to end up. But this farm doesn't just, this industrial solar thing does not just affect the area where the parks are. It's incredibly important that people wake up to what's happening with this grid line, because that is going the whole way to Melksham. And farmers already not involved in this scheme have been served and advised that they may be having compulsory purchase orders against them. And this is not just a fight for our area, because once this is over, this will go east. Batteries, another huge issue. There is a massive proposed battery park above Hallavington. We've been reading about a very small battery farm up in Liverpool, and the fire brigade simply could not put it out. It came to a thing called thermal runaway, and that, as I understand it, is an ongoing reaction that's incredibly difficult to stop. When water is poured onto these batteries to douse or try and douse these flames, a toxic sludge, as I understand it, appears, and this will enter our watercourses, and we need to be very aware of this. Transport. I've been speaking to people running a site called Sonica in Cambridgeshire. What they're trying to, it's very similar to ours. And their traffic proposal at peak times is 64 HGVs a day. They have A roads. They even have B roads. We have single track roads. I mean, I was outside Craig Fuller's house earlier. I mean, looking at jam after jam. So basically, we do need your help. So please volunteer if you've got a skill. A well-known local philosopher and countryman said, "We do not merely study the past, we inherit it. An inheritance brings with it not only the rights of ownership, but the duties of trusteeship. Things fought for and died for should not be idly squandered, for they are the property of others who are not yet born." This leads neatly onto the landowners. These people are our friends and neighbours. I now feel a bit like the line from Four Weddings and a Funeral, you know, when they're talking about somebody who's died, saying there were traitors in our midst. But these people are not NIMBY, which is not in my backyard. They're a new word which I've invented, called IMBY-NIV, which is in my backyard, not in my view. It is not a coincidence that most of these solar panels cannot be seen from the houses of the owners of this land. And that, to me, is morally wrong. If you're a believer in this, put it in front of you, put it on your front lawn, not our countryside. In my mind, these landowners have been guilty of prostitution of the countryside. I looked up prostitution because we had a couple of children here, I sort of changed a few words. But basically, the definition is the practice of engaging in relatively indiscriminate activity, in general with someone who's not a spouse or a friend, in exchange for immediate payment in money or other valuables. In this case, the person who is not the spouse is the developer. All of us are aware of the terrible time farmers are having at the moment with the removal of subsidies, and that is a genuine problem and should be respected. However, all of us would welcome their own smaller plots. I don't think there's anyone who would argue. There are 9 farmers involved. Each of those farmers, I'm sure, would be welcomed to swap what is being proposed for their own 50 megawatt system. That would be a fraction of the land. However, our farming neighbours are selling their souls today for destroying our communities. Their actions have been like a hand grenade in the community. Beyond the environmental and emotional costs of their neighbours, house sales have already fallen through. Indeed, one of my neighbours in Foxley, a widow, has had her purchaser vanish due to the proposed industrial estate of the solar park. This reason was confirmed in an email by the purchaser. Should this scheme succeed, the farmer most invested in this scheme will be receiving £400,000 a year, or £10 million over 25 years. I imagine he will be buying the drinks, but I feel it will be a very empty pub around him. Please can you all, and this is very important, write to your local landowners. It's very important they understand the depth of feeling in the community. Please don't be rude. Just state your feelings and state why you disagree with it in a nice, pleasant and firm way. Most people's emails are available on various websites. I have been told I can't give them, but they are on places. So our area of the Cotswolds, and again, my learning curve has been huge, okay? And I was staggered to read 36 million people visit the Cotswolds every year. And they contribute £1 billion to our local community. That is an immense figure. We here are at the gateway of the southern Cotswolds. From a visitor's point of view, that gateway starts at junction 17 of the M4, heading towards Norton and Shurston. And that gateway will now have mile upon mile upon mile of solar panels. What a loss of tourism and money that will be for the area, especially as the income is going abroad. It will not touch this country with this money. And it's been little over a fortnight since, about a fortnight over, since the details of this have been announced. And there's a petition online, and the link is on the Stop Lyme Down website. And it's for the prohibition of mega solar facilities in excess of 50 megawatts. Now, when we started this 2.5 weeks ago, that only had 2,500 signatures. This evening, I think we're hitting 10,000. That's an immense, immense number from villages that we all added up would probably only be about 5. So it's really, really important that you all sign up. And if you haven't, please go to the Stop Lyme Down website and sign the petition. There's a link there. So we've had a busy 2.5 weeks. We've rallied the troops. We've set up a website. We've organised photo shoots, interviews. Some of you might have seen me on TV earlier. I did actually have a haircut. I can't remember if I told the story already, but it did make me laugh. It's lovely 9A in the High Street here in Malmesbury. It's £9 for a haircut. I got so little. And I said, what do you think of the solar park? And she said, it's almost taking over from the pothole conversation. So we've courted politicians of all creeds. We've got articles in the paper. And most importantly, we've created the best community that I've certainly known for ages. We need your support though. Please sign up on the Stop Lyme website. We can keep you up to date with progress, and we can also ask for your help. We don't need funds at the moment. People have been incredibly kind. That may happen, okay? But at the moment, we can only fight this horrible, horrible development in one way, and that is as a community. Everyone here together. It is going to be long, it's going to be boring, it's going to be tedious. My own business has not seen much action in the last 2 days. I'm hopefully returning to it tomorrow morning. I personally have always hated bullies. And to paraphrase the big man, we shall go on to the end. We shall fight in Wiltshire. We shall fight from our villages and towns. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in our argument. We shall defend our countryside, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight for the foss. We shall fight for the brooks. We shall fight for our fields, hedgerows, and fight for our views. We shall fight in the Cotswolds, and we shall never surrender. Now, I think these developers are going to regret choosing this area. I really do. They picked the wrong tribe, and they should just foss off. Now, has anyone got any questions? Before I just say that, there may be questions I cannot answer, and if we can't get an answer, we will get one for you. Absolutely delighted. Please come up. Any other questions? In the meantime.
Do we know how wedded the landowners are to this project? Do we know if they can be approached? We know them all. We talk to them in a nice, gentle way. Do you know what you're doing? Are they completely tied into these developers, or can they withdraw from it? Or don't we know?
I would be lying if I didn't say that's the $1 million question at the moment, or for some of our farmers, the $10 million question. We believe they can opt out. We believe there might be a financial cost to that to the farmers. We believe we have people who are kind enough to invest in that extra money that the farmer may need to come out. But a lot of this, ladies and gentlemen, is pressure. We need to let these people know what they are doing to our community, okay? I was looking through all the planning applications, and I tried to keep my speech short. I had another cracking couple of pages, okay, about the planning thing. So we've got Johnny Walker up East Dunley, and his argument against the Lee Delamere solar panel, fantastic, and yet he has now got 130 acres in it. You've got the Duke, who was involved in a planning decision. You know, I think, I forgot the figures, I think they're 200 acres, 250 acres. On Babington address headed paper is this wonderful comment as to why Babington looks after its communities and it's so important to keep the character of these areas. We had one of the Foxley owners said, a member of the family said that they thought in time it would beautify the countryside. And I was like, right, yeah, put it on your lawn, let's beautify it. We had an owner in Norton who in a parish meeting not so long ago said, well, we can't have 30-mile-an-hour signs coming to the village. It will ruin the character of the village. I mean, it is insane. But in answer to your question, we are desperately trying to find out if they can come out. But please put pressure on these landowners, but in a nice way, okay?
Hugh, so Hugh, you mentioned the flood risk, and we know that Malmesbury flooded in 2005. And I know we've got Richard Skeffington here, who's a real expert. And maybe he could just give us a view on the why, with the same amount of water falling from the sky, the risk of flooding can increase.
Absolutely.
That's me. I'm happy to do that at some stage if you...
Yeah, perfect. Right. Sorry.
Yes.
And from
CPRE.
CPRE, okay.
Yeah, right.
2 minutes.
Yep. Hello everybody, sorry I've rather sort of elbowed in on this one. It's just that I've had a long conversation this morning with an extremely professional lady in Suffolk. Now Suffolk have had 4 of these HSIPs recently. One is ongoing at the moment, they're waiting the decision at the moment now. Now that one involved a threat which is part of the Newmarket Gallops and all the area around that, because it actually borders Suffolk and Cambridge. So there are enormous, what are called valued landscapes, and you can interpret that in all kinds of ways. It's in a boring document called the MPPF, which I won't tell you about, but it governs our life. Now, what I want to tell you about this type of consultation, forget everything that you knew about consultations that you do through Wiltshire Council. Sorry.
You hold it right to your lips.
Right. So forget about the normal way of doing a consultation. This one is in 4 stages, basically. The first one, which is called, this one that you're in at the moment, is called the non-statutory consultation. Now, everybody, please, as you've been encouraged, answer this, because frankly, 300 letters going in, each one showing a slightly different argument, if you can, has as much what they call weight in planning, and to a developer, as one very strongly worded letter from one of your groups, your representative group, or indeed us or others. So I'm afraid it's a chore, but please do write in each one of you. Now, that's stage 1.
Right where, sorry?
Well, you write directly to the developer, to the proposer, to their office in London. I'm sure you've got the address. In about 6 months' time, less maybe, they will have assessed all the comments and will come back to what's called the statutory consultation phase. Now, in that one, I'm afraid, you all need to write again. You can say what you said before, obviously adjusted, depending on what amendments may have been made to the proposal. But it's incredibly important that you again answer, because eventually all of that correspondence will go in front of the planning inspectors. So you must have it there, it's got to be on a record. Civil servants love huge wodges of filing. Whether they read it or not is different, but they get the gist. But it's very important. Now then, after that, of course, I'm looking at the pessimistic scenario when this is going to go ahead.
What?
Well, I'll tell you. I'll make a comment on that in a minute. The next stage is when your campaigning group, and indeed us and others, will have to write to the inspectorate, and you take something called a Rule 6. Now, Rule 6 allows you to attend the inquiry and make further representations at that stage. If you don't comply with Rule 6, you're out of it. You then cannot make any further comments, and you're not included in the information, although I'm sure your group would include you. So the Rule 6, that will probably be after the development consent order, which will happen after the second consultation, goes to the planning inspectorate from the applicant. And if the planning inspectorate then consult with the Secretary of State and they agree, then the action really starts. So you're talking about a year's time. Now, I know James earlier on said this can go on for ages. I'm afraid it can't and it won't, because last autumn the government went out to consultation about changing the rules for HSIPs. They want to shorten the process because what? Guess what? They don't like groups like this because it holds up the parliamentary process of getting the permission. And big national projects, they want to hurry them through as quickly as possible. So the procedure, and it's come into action now this April, is that they want to see this kind of an application finished in 2 years. So you have to concentrate your minds on getting everything that you can together now. Now, I just wanted to talk about particular issues that I know from my discussion with the lady in Suffolk has been listened to. Find one or two really important points and issues, sites here, which are probably nationally significant. The Foss Way is the obvious one. Now that could be a showstopper, and you've really got to work on that. And the archaeology, as referred to by somebody earlier on, actually I can give the name of an archaeologist who does this kind of work. That will be crucial. I spoke to him about it. He said he thinks there's loads of archaeology here, which could be really, really important. So what I'm saying to you is, hang in there. Send your sniper fire at the second stage. The blunderbuss is now. Send lots of stuff in. Refine it down at the second stage. Be more accurate. Be more technical. Make your points very clearly and don't make them too many at that stage. Strengthen everything. So it really is a process, and you have to follow the procedure and the process to get into what will be the inquiry, and that's where you all want to be able to be. But if you don't fulfill the criteria running up to that point, you don't get a look in. So it's a very different system. The only, you was commenting, well, no, of course it's not going to go through. The only caveat I would put out is that the reason the HSIPs were set up is because the government wanted big schemes of the sort that are not to fail. So they they've set up a system which is called really a consent system. This isn't a system where you can put an argument pro and an argument against and talk about it and discuss it. They have decided they want to give consent, and you have to walk back from that. So I'm sorry to be a bit realistic, sound a bit pessimistic. I won't tell you that only one HSIP has ever been refused. But
well, there's one out this week, isn't there?
there is, well, the cynical one in Suffolk, and that was the one that involved Newmarket and that whole area. And the lady she's not too sure how that's going to go. You are up against a government that almost has made up its mind before it starts. That's why it set up this process. Democracy, I mean, here doesn't really exist. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Just quickly, just say that there were so many points there, so many right.
If you're like me, it's like being given directions. You can remember the first three and then it's gone, okay? That was a very worthwhile speech, and thank you very much. What we will do is we will be in contact and we will put the process for everyone to follow, okay? Henry.
Can we ask if the CPRE are going to be able to do anything to help us?
Are the CPRE going to be able to help us? I'm sure they will. Fantastic, thank you.
Could I just ask Anne to clarify something she said about writing to the developer?
About what?
About writing to the developer.
Yes.
Anne, my understanding is if we bombard the developer with questions and therefore suggestions, all we'll really be doing is giving them a much stronger argument.
Sorry, yeah.
All we'll really be doing is giving them a much stronger argument to then form their justification for the project. In other words, if someone writes in and says, what will happen to the bats? All they do is then put that they'll spend £10,000 on bat boxes in their consultation, in their final document. And the Secretary of State will say, isn't this a wonderful, responsible developer? They're spending £10,000 on bat boxes. So in other words, do we really want to write to the developer and tell them exactly how we feel, or will that simply strengthen their case?
Sorry, one second.
Can I make some key points that are really important for this area? We are in a water catchment area. We're in a time of climate change and shocks and stresses. You've witnessed what happens to the roads here with runoff, all the good soils coming off the land, right? Natural England and DEFRA have been working really hard on nature-based solutions. That's encouraging farmers to plant trees, put habitats into landscape, which holds water in the land. It acts like a natural reservoir within the land. So that is a really fundamental point for us to counter this solar farm in this area, is the hydrology, which I'm delighted with what Polly's doing. The other aspect I want to state is there's scientific evidence now around the importance of nature and our ability to walk in nature, to walk in agriculture. It's scientifically proven by a number of universities. Dr. William Bird presented to the Department of Levelling Up, Housing and Communities earlier this year, giving evidence which is changing policy in our towns, our communities and landscape around them. So we have an opportunity actually to shape policy for the better with this campaign. We need to get some universities on board. The other thing I was going to say is the National Trust and the AONBs have been looking at a nature recovery strategy that covers the chalk typology from the Cotswolds all the way looping down to Bath and Bristol, again this landscape. So this is this area has a huge impact on communities, not just here, but downstream, and that's really fundamental. So do add your comments about how this is affecting your health and well-being. What do you get out of being in nature, being in agriculture, living here? It's a fact, it's not intangible anymore. So I just wanted to make those points.
I think that's I think that's an excellent point, and interesting enough, some of the research I've seen recently has, since COVID, has been the importance for people's mental health of getting out into the countryside and experiencing big skies, fresh air, and beautiful countryside. So thank you. Andrew, you're absolutely right, and one of the things we were talking about is how appalling the maps were that the developer produced. They didn't show footpaths, they didn't show towns, they had stickers over Malmesbury. We have now cobbled together a bigger map that is available on our website, because it's very, very difficult to get the understanding of the scale of this project. That map also now shows all the footpaths, and my understanding in these developments is the footpaths remain, but they literally have these deer fences either side. And I went to measure them. I'm the worst person to measure something. I'm so small, but they are, I think, about that height. Okay, and they're mammal-proof. And again, my steep learning curve, I went and measured on the map the one south of Bradfield Wood, and it's and bear in mind they've got to pin fence off the footpaths. It was just under 10 kilometres of fencing. that's a mammal-free area. You're absolutely spot on, and before you all glaze over, we will help you with this, okay? We've got a leading QC that we are employing. What? A KC, sorry, not a QC. Okay, yes, sorry, Deputy Lieutenant, sorry, you're right. And anyway, he, interesting enough, was found because friends in the city found out who, what's it called, Macquarie are more frightened of than anyone else. And this is actually the person that they employed, okay, so we've beaten them to it. And we are having some leading QC advice. Casey! Christ! Casey! Okay. Anyway. Right. Any more questions? I mean, how many experts can we find in one room? This is fantastic. I'm going to put you on to Richard Skeffington, who is an expert in flooding. Okay.
Thank you, Hugh. I've spent 22 years as an environmental scientist in the power industry, and I lived in Churston for over 30 years, and after leaving the power industry, I was Professor of Environmental Science at Reading University. So I know about one or two things. Let's just, before we go on to flooding, since we've just been talking about land classification, my understanding is that there are land classification maps, and this has been around since about 1960s, but in late 80s, the Minister of Agriculture, as was, decided to revise it, and that's when this 3A and 3B split started to come. But that's when Mrs. Thatcher was in power, and she said, well, if anyone wants agricultural land classification, they'll have to pay for it themselves. The state isn't going to pay for it. The end result of this is there aren't many places with an current agricultural land classification that's legally valid, and that's why the developer is having to do their own, which raises very obvious problems. There are no what they call post-1988 land classification in the land down area. So we're relying on the developer's consultant to be honest about it. So, but looking at the old maps, there is quite a lot of grade 3. We don't know whether it will turn into 3A or 3B. There is a certain amount of grade 4, and there's a little bit of grade 2. So it's iffy. The map that is available is what DEFRA calls a predictive map, in which they use soil data to predict what the result would be if they'd done a land classification.
Richard, just to clarify, and please correct me if I'm wrong, you can't, as I understand, you can't develop on solar on grade 3 ground, is that right?
I think there's a presumption against it. I think it's a not a no. So are you more expert in this? Gentleman there? Let's just leave that.
Then let's go on to water.
Let's go on to water. So, so water, why does it make a difference? We've had no detail from the developers, so it's impossible to do any firm predictions. However, it's easy to calculate how much water comes off these solar panels in a year. It'll be roughly 2,700 Olympic-sized swimming pools every year. We'll be running directly off, so if you're more familiar with the activity zone, about 20,000 activity zones every year. Now, the water's rainfalling now anyway. Why does the panels make a difference? It's because there's an area of dryness underneath them. So we're asking a small area to accept this water. Now that's why there may be flooding issues. But as Phil said earlier, It is quite important not to air very technical issues in public because it alerts the developer to what our arguments might be. So just to say, we are onto it in Stop Lying Down. We have got experts. We hope to acquire some more. We're looking at all the issues, including surface water, groundwater, flooding of rural roads, sediment loss into rivers, whether chemicals are used to wipe the wipe the panels, whether there are groundwater effects from the battery storage, etc., etc. We're looking at it. We'll hope to leave no stone unturned, but we're going to hold our detailed fire until the statutory consultation.
Thank you very much. The consultations that have happened at the moment have been a bit of a farce, and they're part of the procedure. And what particularly annoyed me was there were 3 questions about solar. 1, you love it, great. 2, you don't know anything about it. Well, I mean, you're bloody stupid if you don't know about solar. And 3, you hate it, okay? So you're either made to look like an extremist or an advocate. And there was no little button saying, I agree with solar, but on a limited scale, and I think that's wrong. So you are 100% right. I'm probably guilty of being a tart. I want to get everyone's attention and love before I hit you with some cash. We will need some money, undoubtedly. The KC, and we are, actually for your information, we are looking to employ a full-time project manager on this project because everyone, all these specialists have quite rightly explained, the detail is overwhelming and you have to have an expertise in running these projects, and that is something that is in play. So again, I apologise, it's been 3 weeks. We are getting them, and you're 100% right, so we will need funds. But I mean, all of us have chipped in a little bit so far, but I think it's worth it. We're in for a battle. It is not going to be easy. As everyone said who's involved and knows more about these things than I am, this process has changed. It is quicker, but we have got some very, very good people working on it, and we will need your support for that. So thank you for bringing that up. Out of interest, can I just put your hands up? Has everyone signed the petition going through the Parliament at the moment? Okay, so weird enough, we've almost got enough to get over the 10,000. If you all go home tonight and sign up, we're literally at 9,800 or something like that. Thank you very, very much for all for coming. Please register on Stop Lying Down, and then we can let you know what's going on.